Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. Chapter 15, The Quidditch Final. He sent me this, Hermione said, holding out the letter. Harry took it. The parchment was damp, and enormous teardrops had smudged the ink so badly in places that it was very difficult to read. Dear Hermione, we lost. I'm allowed to bring him back to Hogwarts. Execution date to be fixed. Breaky has joined London. I won't forget all the help you gave us, Hagrid. They can't do this, said Harry. They can't. Buckbeak isn't dangerous. Malfoy's dad is frightened. They come a tea into it, said Hermione, wiping her eyes. You know what he's like. They're all a bunch of dawdly old fools, and they were scared. There'll be an appeal, though. There always is. Only I can't see any hope. Nothing will have changed. Yeah, it will, said Ron fiercely. You won't have to do all the work alone this time, Hermione. I'll help. Oh, Ron! Hermione flung her arms around Ron's neck and broke down completely. Ron, looking quite terrified, patted her very awkwardly on the top of her head. Finally, Hermione drew away. Ron, I'm really sorry about Scabbers, she sobbed. Oh, well, he was old, said Ron, looking thoroughly relieved that she had let go of him. And he was a bit useless. You never know, Mom and Dad might get me an owl now. The safety measures imposed on the students since the Black Second break-in made it impossible for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to go and visit Hagrid in the evenings. The only chance of talking to him was during Care of Magical Creatures lessons. He seemed numb with shock at the verdict. It's all my fault. Got all tongue-tied. They was all sitting there in the back robes, and I kept dropping me notes and forgetting all the dates. Yeah, look up at me, Hermione. And then Lucius Malfoy looked up and said a bit, and the committee just did exactly what he told him. There's still the appeal, said Ron fiercely. Don't give up yet. We're working on it. They were walking back up to the castle with the rest of the class. Ahead, they could see Malfoy, who was walking with Crabbe and Goyle, and kept looking back, laughing derisively. It's not good, Ron, said Hagrid sadly as they reached the castle steps. That comedy's Lucius Malfoy's pocket. I'm just gonna make sure the rest of the Beaky's time is the happiest he'd ever had. I owe him that. Hagrid turned round and hurried back towards his cabin, his face buried in his handkerchief. Look at him blubber! Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had been standing just inside the castle doors listening. Have you ever seen anything quite as pathetic? Said Malfoy. And he's supposed to be a teacher! Harry and Ron both made furious moves towards Malfoy, but Hermione got there first. Smack! She had slapped Malfoy around the face with all the strength she could mutter. Malfoy staggered. Harry, Ron, Crabbe, and Goyle stood flabbergasted as Hermione raised her hand again. Don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you fool. You evil... Hermione, said Ron weakly, and he tried to grab her hand as he swung it back. Get off, Ron! Hermione pulled out her wand. Malfoy stepped backwards. Crabbe and Goyle looked at him for instructions, thoroughly bewildered. Got it. Come on, Malfoy muttered, and next moment all three of them had disappeared into the passageway of the dungeons. Hermione, Ron said again, sounding both stunned and impressed. Harry, you'd better beat him in the Quidditch final, Hermione said shrilly. You just better had, because he can't stand it if Slytherin win. We're doing charms, said Ron, still goggling at Hermione. We'd better go. They hurried up the marble staircase towards Professor Flitwick's classroom. You're late, boys, said Professor Flitwick reprovingly as Harry opened the classroom door. Come along, quickly, one's out. We're experimenting with cheering charms today. We're already divided into pairs. Harry and Ron hurried to a desk at back and opened their bags. Ron looked behind him. Where's Hermione gone? Harry looked around too. Hermione hasn't entered the classroom, yet Harry knew she had been right next to him when he had opened the door. That's weird, he said, staring at Ron. Maybe she went to the bathroom or something. But Hermione didn't interrupt all lesson. She could have done with a cheering charm on her too, said Ron, as the class left for lunch, all grinning broadly. The cheering charms left them with a feeling of great contentment. Hermione wasn't at lunch either. By this time they had finished their apple pie. The after effects of the cheering charms were wearing off, and Harry and Ron had started to get slightly worried. You don't think Malfoy did something to her? Ron said anxiously as they hurried upstairs towards the Gryffindor tower. They passed the security trolls, gave the fat lady the passport, flibbergibbet. and scrambled through the portrait hole into the common room. Hermione was sitting at a table, fast asleep, her head resting on an open Ethermessy book. They went to sit down either side of her. Harry brought her awake. "What?" said Hermione, waking up with a start, and staring wildly around. "It's time to go. Which lesson have we got now?" "Divination, but it's not for another 20 minutes, said Harry. "Hermione, why didn't you come to Chom's?" "What?" "Oh, no," Hermione squeaked. "I forgot to go to Chom's." "But how could you forget?" said Harry. "You were with us till we were right outside the classroom." "I don't believe it," Hermione wailed. "Was Professor Flitwick angry?" "Oh, it was Malfoy. I was thinking about him and I lost track of things." "You know what, Hermione?" said Ron, looking down at the enormous Fluency book Hermione had been using as a plan. "I recall you cracking up. You're trying to do too much." "No, I'm not," said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for the back. "I just made a mistake, that's all. I'd better go and see Professor Flitwick and say sorry. I'll see you in divination." Hermione joined them at the foot of the ladder to Professor Trelawney's classroom 20 minutes later, looking extremely harassed. "I can't believe I missed chewing charms, and I bet they come up in our exams. Professor Flitwick hinted they might." Together, they climbed the ladder into the dim, stiffening tower room. Glowing on every little table was a crystal ball full of pearly white mist. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down together at the same trickery table. "I thought we weren't starting crystal balls until next term," Ron muttered, casting a very eye around to Professor Trelawney in case she was lurking nearby. "Don't complain. This means we finish palmistry," Harry muttered back. I was getting sick of her flinching every time she looked at my hands. "Good day to you," said the familiar misty voice as Professor Trelawney made her usual dramatic entrance out of the shadows. Parvati and Leverden quivered with excitement, their faces lit by the milky glow of their crystal ball. "I have decided to introduce the crystal ball a little earlier than I had planned," said Professor Trelawney, seeing herself up with her back to the fire and gazing around. "The Fates have informed me that your examination in June will concern the orb, and I am anxious to give you sufficient practice." Hermione snorted. "Well, honestly, the Fates have informed her. Who says the exam? She does." "What an amazing prediction," she said, not troubling to keep her voice low. It was hard to tell whether Professor Trelawney had heard them, as her face was hidden in a shadow. She continued, however, as though she had not. "Crystal gazing is a particularly refined art," she said dreamily. "I do not expect any of you to see when first you peer into the orb's infinite depths. We shall start by practicing relaxing the conscious mind and externalize." Man began to snigger uncontrollably and had to stuff his fist in his mouth to stiffen up the nose, so as to clear the inner eye and the superconscious, perhaps. "If we are lucky, some of you will see before the end of the class." And so they began. Harry, at least, felt extremely foolish, staring blankly at the crystal ball, trying to keep his mind empty when thoughts such as "this is stupid" kept drifting across it. He didn't have the tone kept breaking into silent giggles. And Hermione kept tooting. "Seen anything yet?" Harry asked him, after a quarter of an hour's quiet crystal gazing. "Yeah, there's a burn on this table," said Ron, pointing. "Someone spilled the candle. This is such a waste of time," Hermione hissed. "I could be practicing something useful. I could be catching up and chewing charms." Professor Trelawney ruffled past. "Would anyone like me to help them interpret the shadowy patterns with their orb?" she murmured over the clinking of her bangles. "I don't need help," Ron whispered. "It's obvious what this means. We're going to do lots of talk tonight." Both Harry and Hermione burst out laughing. "Now, really," said Professor Trelawney as everyone's heads turned in her direction. Parvati and Lavender were looking scandalized. "You are disturbing the clairvoyant vibrations." She approached their table and peered into the crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew what was coming. "There is something here," Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face to the ball, so it was reflected twice in her huge glasses. "Something moving. But what is this?" Harry was prepared to bet everything he owned, indulging his firebolt, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was. And sure enough, "My dear," Professor Trelawney breathed, gazing up at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before. My dear, stalking towards you, growing ever closer. Oh, for goodness sake," said Hermione loudly. Not that a ridiculous grin again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes to Hermione's face. Parvati whispered something to Lavender, as they both glared at Hermione too. Professor Trelawney stood up. surveying Hermione with an unmistakable anger. "I'm so sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has been apparent that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane." There was a moment's silence. Then, "Fine," said Hermione suddenly, getting up and cramming and fogging the future back into her bag. "Fine," she repeated, swinging her bag over her shoulder and almost knocking her off his chair. "I give up. I'm leaving." And to the whole class's amazement, Hermione strode over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, and climbed down the ladder out of sight. It took a few minutes for the class to settle down again. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten all about the Grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily, as she tucked her gauzy shawl more closely to her. "Ooh," said Lavender so suddenly, making everyone start. "Oh, Professor Trelawney, I've just remembered. You saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever." "You said it ages ago, Professor." Professor Trelawney gave her a dewy smile. "Yes, my dear, I indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might have mistaken the signs. The NI can be a burden, you know." Lavender and Pravati looked deeply impressed and moved over so that Professor Trelawney could join their table instead. "Someday Hermione's having a," Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. "Yeah." Harry glanced into the crystal ball but saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the Grim again? Would he? The last thing he needed was another near-fatal accident, with a Quidditch final drawing of a neither. The Easter holidays were not exactly relaxing. The third years had never had so much homework. Neville Longbottom seemed close to a nervous collapse, and he wasn't the only one. "Cold as a holiday," Seamus Finnegan roared to the common room for one afternoon. "The exams are ages away that they're planning at." But nobody had as much to do as Hermione. Even without divination, she was taking more subjects than anybody else. She was usually last to leave their common room at night, first to arrive at the library next morning. She had shadows like clip-ins under her eyes and seemed constantly close to tease. Ron had taken over responsibility for Bugsby's appeal. When he wasn't doing his own work, he was poring over enormously thick volumes with names like the Handbook of Hippogriff Psychology and Foul or Fool, a study of hippogriff brutality. He was so absorbed, he even forgot to be horrible to Crookshanks. Harry, meanwhile, had to fit in his homework around Quidditch practice every day. Not to mention the endless discussion of the tactics with Wood. The Gryffindor-Slytherin match could take place on the first Saturday after the Easter holidays. Slytherins were leading the tournament by exactly 200 points. This meant, as Wood constantly reminded his team, that they needed to win the match by more than amount to win the cup. It also meant that the burden of winning fell largely on Harry, because capturing the snitch was worth 150 points. "So you must only catch it if we're more than 50 points up," Wood told Harry constantly. "Only if we're more than 50 points up, Harry, or we win the match but lose the cup. You've got that, haven't you? You must only catch the snitch if we're—" "I know, Oliver!" Harry yelled. The whole of Gryffindor house was obsessed with the coming match. Gryffindor hadn't won the Quidditch Cup since the legendary Charlie Weasley, Ron's second oldest brother, had been Seika. But Harry doubted whenever any of them, even Wood, wanted to win as much as he did. The enmity between Harry and Malfoy was at its highest point ever. Malfoy was still smarting around the mud-throwing incident in Hogsmeade, and even more furious that Harry had somehow fought his way out of punishment. Harry hadn't forgotten of Malfoy's attempts to sabotage him in the match against the Ravenclaw, but it was the matter of Bugsby that made him most determined to beat Malfoy in front of the entire school. Never in anyone's memory had a match approached in such a highly charged atmosphere. By the time the holidays were over, tension between the two teams and their houses was at breaking point. A number of small scuffles broke out in the corridors, culminating in a nasty incident in which Gryffindor 4th year and Slytherin 6th year ended up in the hospital wing with 3 leaks sprouting out of their ears. Harry was having a particularly bad time of it. He couldn't walk to class without Slytherin sticking out their legs and trying to trip him up. Crabbe and Goyle kept popping up whenever he went and slouching away, looking disappointed when they saw him surrounded by people. Wood had given instructions that Harry should be accompanied everywhere in case the Slytherins tried to put him out of action. The whole of Gryffindor House took up the challenge enthusiastically, so it was impossible for Harry to get out of classes on time because he was usually surrounded by a vast chattering crowd. Harry was more concerned for his fireball's safety than his own. When he wasn't flying it, he locked it securely in his trunk and frequently dashed back up to Gryffindor Tower at break time to check that it was still there. As usual, pursuits were abandoned in the Gryffindor common room the night before the match. Even Hermione had put down her books. "I can't work. I can't concentrate," she said nervously. There was a great deal of noise. Fred and George Weasley were dealing with the pressure by being louder and more exuberant than ever. Oliver Wood was crushed over a model of a Quidditch pitch in the corner, prodding his little figures across it with his wand and muttering to himself. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie were laughing at Fred and George's jokes. Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione, removed from the center of things, trying not to think about the next day, because every time he did, he had the horrible sensation that something very large was fighting to get out of his stomach. "You're going to be fine," Hermione told him, though she looked possibly terrified. "You've got a firebolt," said Ron. "Yeah," said Harry, his stomach whirling. It came as a relief when Wood suddenly stood up and yelled, "Team, bat!" Harry slept badly. First he dreamed that he had overslept and that Wood was yelling, "Where were you? We had to use Neville instead." Then he dreamed that Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherin team arrived for the match, riding dragons. He was flying at breakneck speed, trying to avoid a spurt of flames from Malfoy's steed's mouth, when he realized he had forgotten his fireball.